All right, here we go. We've got Don Kanowski, 87 years old. It's February 17th, 2025. He's going to continue to tell you a little bit more about himself.
Okay, I can do that.
And why don't you once again tell him when you were born?
Okay, I'll just tell you who I am so
Yeah.
you know. I'm Donald Kanowski. I'm 87 years old. I was born December 15th, 1937 in Hillsboro, North Dakota, and we moved to Fargo to the farm in 1942, I believe it was. And then, as I said before, I went to grade school in Osgood School District number 13 through the fifth grade, and then we started school in West Fargo is where we went to. Anyway, and I talked about the fact that a guy worked every day after you came home from school. As a matter of fact, I never saw a basketball game or a football game in person until I was in the eighth grade. Living out in the country, Hookham's had a basketball net by their barn, but nobody knew how the game went. We just kind of fought for the ball and threw it up at the basket. In the same way with football in school, we would have two teams, and the one team would take David Beach was our neighbor, and he was just a little bit bigger and I think a year older than I was, but James Montpleasure would take him down to the ground, and then I would sit on him so that he wouldn't interfere with them fighting for the ball to make a touchdown. So that was my job in grade school at football. And like I say, I never saw a real game until I was in the eighth grade. So I had no idea how the game actually was played. And that probably had something to do with the fact that I never played basketball in high school. And the other fact that I never played basketball is because we were expected to come home after school. And I did get to play a little bit of football starting in my junior year. Then we were able to play football, go to fall practice. And then in my senior year starting in 1954, I graduated in 55. So in 54 would be when we had the football season. And I never got a chance they started practice a week before school for football, and I didn't really know why they did that. But anyway, starting back in 1952, I went to work for Meyer Guernsey Farm.
I hate to interrupt you. So why had you never seen a football game? Because you had to go home and work on the farm? Is that right?
Yes, I never saw a football game or a basketball game because at night we'd ride the school bus home, and then we never got back because we would milk or get the chores started, and at about 4:45 or right at 5:30 to 5:45, we would come inside. My mother would have supper ready, and we would eat, and then we'd go back out to milk the cows, which of course starting at 6:30 took us till 7:45. Well, then it was too late to go to town and watch a basketball game or a football game. And but then in 1952.
Well, and let me ask you one other question. Didn't you tell me at one point in time that your Father George, changed the milking schedule so you could stay early or stay late to go to football practice?
Yes, but that didn't happen till later on, you know.
Oh, okay.
And in the eighth grade, we came home. That was what it was.
Okay.
But then we got to go to see a few basketball games and football games. And then in 1952, I started working for Meyer Guernsey Farm on a day basis. When we didn't have anything at home, I could go there and haul hay and things like that, clean the barns, things like that. And I got paid $8 a day working from 8 till about 5 o'clock. And the first $8 I made, I bought a pair of roller skates because we could get to go to Horace once in a while on Friday nights. My dad would take us there, and they had a small gymnasium that we roller skated in. So my first money that I ever made was spent on roller skates. But anyway, then as I went through working for Meyer Guernsey Farm in the fall of 1953, we had showed 4-H cattle at the Fargo Fair in late August. And then I helped Myers. They showed cattle there also because they had a registered Guernsey herd of cattle. So then I would help with that. So it would have been the fall of '53. Then I worked strictly with the Myers herd at the fairgrounds. So in 1954, the year of my graduation or my senior year, I drove a truck with a load of cattle with Alan Meyer to Huron, South Dakota, because the fair in South Dakota ran the first week that we started school after Labor Day. So I got home as a junior year then, and then I got to go out and play a little bit of football. And then in my senior year, matter of fact, there's a picture someplace. It was in the Fargo Forum when I was in my senior year when we were playing football. So I did get a chance to play a little football at that time. But mainly working was what I did. And then starting in, I graduated in 1955. And in 1955, Alan Meyer wanted to make, as they called it, the show circuit, because it was worthwhile for people with good cattle like Alan Meyer had to go and show at different fairs, because people that were in the full-blooded or registered Guernsey business, they always wanted a cow that would produce the most butter fat. And at that time, there was somebody from the Guernsey Association that would go around from Guernsey herd to Guernsey herd in North Dakota, Minnesota, and South Dakota. And he would record all of that. So everything was recorded on it. And we had this Guernsey cow by the name of Meyer Guernsey Farm Little Lady, the best butterfat producing cow of all the Guernsey cows. And Alan, when he could go to the fairs, then these other Guernsey people would come and they would pay premium price to buy the offspring of these. So that's why we covered the circuit. But anyway, then starting in summer of 1955, Alan decided that we would go by rail. We would fix up a boxcar in Fargo. We'd put a deck in it so we'd have hay and feed and water. And then we had a deck over the doors that would open up. So we had a mattress up there to sleep. And we loaded the cattle in Fargo and we went to Grand Forks, was the first fair. And we unloaded and did the fair in Grand Forks. And then after that, we went to Minot. And in Grand Forks, we had to lead the cattle quite a ways from the railroad to the cattle barns, but that was just part of the deal. But in Minot, they even had the rail that went right into the fairgrounds. So we just unloaded and went there. And we did that for a week. And then we went on to Great Falls, Montana from there. And this was in the days when the steam engine was still used considerably. They came with diesel engines about that time. But anyway, in 1955, there were still the old coal burners going. And we were hooked about 7 cars back of the locomotive. And we would sleep up on the bunk is what we would do. But anyway, the old smoke would really come into that car from depending upon how the wind was blowing, of course. But so then we went to Great Falls and then down to Billings. And then from Billings coming back into Fargo, we got laid up in Mandan for a day and a half, just in the rail yard. So we had feed and everything to take care of the cattle. We milked the cows right there in the cattle car. Matter of fact, when we went over the Missouri River, I poured water right down into the milk right down into the Missouri River. And then we came back to the Fargo Fair. And then from the Fargo Fair, we went to the Minnesota State Fair, and we spent time right there, and then ended up going to Huron, South Dakota, and then coming back to Fargo. So that was quite a summer on the train. And at that time, of course, the hobos were pretty thick. And when you think about it, we would get paid at the end of the fair for displaying our cattle, and you got so much for winners and things like that. And I remember Alan went home, so it was just Jimmy Sodoban and myself, and I had a billfold full of money because they paid you off in cash. And just stopping to think back, those hobos were out there. If they knew you had any money, why, you had lost it. Of course, they didn't know that. They'd come by and talk, and at that time, coffee was only a nickel. And of course, say, you got a nickel for coffee? Well, you'd throw them a nickel, and they'd be happy. But then, as the train would start out, they would jump up on the ladders and crawl up on top of the boxcars, and that's why back in that time you'd see people riding on top of the boxcars. So it was kind of a different experience compared to today's world, and it was pretty exciting. And then that winter,
Can I ask you one question about the train trip?
sure,
Just so I understand. So you were in the same boxcar as the cattle. You slept in the same boxcar and the cattle on a platform for basically all summer as you toured around. Is that correct?
yes, we would
Yep.
turn around when we would unload at the fair. Then we would unload we had a big trunk and we had blankets and everything. We slept right in the barns, right with the cattle is what we would do. And we had this big trunk that we would keep our stuff in. And then, like I say, then when we got home that fall, then I got contacted by a place called Yager Brothers in Clear Lake, South Dakota, because in this whole process I'd met up with a guy by the name of Lefty Kluge, and he was a herdsman, which is the guy that takes care of the cattle. And I met up with him, and he was going to make the winter run, which started in Denver and went from Denver down to Amarillo, then Houston and Dallas and the towns in Texas, over to Louisiana, into Mississippi, into March, and then we would come back. So that on that trip, we had a semi. And back when I was doing the stuff for Meyer Guernsey Farm, we did go one time up to the Minot Fair with a picture, or with a little international semi. We still have a picture of that with the Meyer Guernsey Farm sign on the side. And I drove this old international truck, never driven a semi in my life, heading down the highway to Minot, the fairgrounds, and coming back with it. So then I had all this semi-driving experience in my life. And then Yagers bought a brand new Chevrolet stub-nose truck and hooked that to a cattle semi. And then in January, I went to work for them, and we started in Denver. And like I say, we made the tour down to Amarillo, Houston, Dallas, all those towns, and on back, came back in the spring. And when I got back that spring, I said to myself, you know, I don't ever want to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to get cattle ready for a show day. So I have not owned anything that eats oats anymore. Everything has to have a key in it, and I can turn it and get off. So anyway, then in the process, I spent a few months at Hanson Mechanical Trade School learning about automobiles and things like that. So that was kind of my education in the world, was Hanson Mechanical Trade School. And I could build, I remember I built a Chevrolet, had a 6-cylinder engine car, and it would top out at 85 miles an hour unless you put a new camshaft in it. But from off of the line, taking off, the old Fords that could run up to 100, they'd beat us off the line and we could never really catch them. So when I went to Hanson Mechanical Trade School, I learned how to, well, what we did, I took the intake manifold off, cut a hole in each end of that, put another carburetor on each end, and put it back on. Problem with that was that when you hit the accelerator pump, so much gas had come out, it would flood out before it'd get going. So my friend John Berlin, who owned the car, we disconnected the cable that went to what we call the air intakes, where you could open a vent and get fresh air in the summertime and close off in the winter. So we took that and hooked it up to the 2 outside carburetors. So when we line up against those Fords, there was 2 of us. he would hit the accelerator in low gear, and the minute we got going, I would pull the handle and we'd kick in the other two carburetors. We'd just leave those Fords sitting for a little ways. By the time we got to the end of the quarter of a mile, they were passing us, going a lot faster than we could ever go, but we could get there first. So that was just kind of a fun thing to do in life. And then after that, from that experience, then I ended up in 1958, after doing all this cattle stuff and things like that, because I had gone to Hanson Mechanical Trade School, I had a little mechanical knowledge. And in 1957, the first automatic pin setters for bowling alley came to West Fargo. They built an 8-lane bowling alley in West Fargo, and Vernis Loberg hired me to be the mechanic for the machines. So I got started in the bowling business. And then the next year, they built a 12-lane bowling alley in Fargo, Northport Lanes, which is still open. But anyway, I went to work there, and then you did everything eventually. And then the summer of 1959, Vernis Loberg and Rex Olson, who owned the bowling alley, decided that they would go into the millwright work of installing bowling machines in the bowling alleys that were being built around the country. And of course, every little town was building a bowling alley at that time. So anyway, we worked in the summer then, we were all the way from Winnipeg to Sioux Falls to Minneapolis putting in bowling machines. And that worked out great, and I really enjoyed it. So then I had always thought it'd be fun to be in business. As a matter of fact, just when I was at the end of my high school, I had talked to my mother about opening a Dairy Queen in Mayville because I thought that would be a real fun thing to do. So I always was interested in business. So anyway, I got married. We got married in 1960, and in October of 1960. So then I checked around what towns would have a small town could stand a 6-lane bowling alley. So in Hawley and places around here, there was always machines that were in it. So somebody said, well, you got to go to Ashley, North Dakota, which is about 150 miles or a little more from Fargo. So one day I got in the car and drove to Ashley, North Dakota, talked to the guy that owned the bank, Max Wishick. He was an attorney and owned the bank, told him what I'd like to do, and they had 2 little hand-setting bowling lanes in Ashley. So I told him what I wanted to do, and he said, I said, I only have enough money to put the lanes in. I don't have enough money to build a building. So anyway, Max worked around with some of the guys and said he had about 6 guys that would put up a building. The problem was, how could they be sure after they put the building up, because I had so little money, that I would come? Well, now, when people talk about, I've done everything in life all by myself. Nobody ever helped me get to where I am. So I was talking to my boss, Rex Olson, and I told him what the deal was, and he said, call Max Wishick, tell him we're coming to see him. So we drove down to Ashley and got together with these guys, and Rex had a financial statement with him and showed him what his ability was, and he says, I've known Don for years, he's worked for me, and I know he'll be here. Show me where to sign, I'll sign for him. So if it hadn't been for Rex Olson, I would have never got in the bowling business. I had never got into business, and I've been in several since. So I was really fortunate. So when you hear somebody say, nobody ever helped me, don't believe them, because somebody helped everybody along the way. Well, anyway, then...
I want to back up just a second. Can you talk a little bit about a couple things you've always talked to me about? One was selling fireworks.
Oh, yeah.
And then the fireworks, and then how about building a lake cabin or two? So you want to talk about those two things?
Yeah, we can back up to that a little bit.
Yeah.
Because Vernis Loberg, who was one of the owners of the bowling alley, he would bring in fireworks from Texas, and he had several stands around the city of Fargo. So for a couple of years in this whole process, when you're young, you kind of jump around a little bit. But we would John Berlin and I would put up a stand between West Fargo and Fargo, and we'd sell fireworks. And of course, that was a good deal. And then where you could really make money was, they called it a brick of firecrackers. A brick was 40 packs. So you'd buy a brick of firecrackers for $10. If you sold them by the pack, you'd sell them for $1 a piece, so you'd sell them for 40. And if you could just turn around and sell the brick, you'd sell it for 20, so you made $10. But you got to remember, that was the time when you were making $10 a day for labor, and if you could drive over into Minnesota and find a bunch of guys standing on the street corner, you could sell a couple $100 worth of fireworks and make a lot more money than you could working on somebody's farm. So that was one of the things that was kind of exciting.
And then can you talk about the first time you met your future father-in-law, or one of the first times you met him, Al Carlson, Lorraine's father, and how you met him?
Yeah, when the first time I went to meet Lorraine's parents in Portland, that was close to the 4th of July, and of course I had some fireworks with me, some firecrackers. And anyway, when we stopped in Hillsboro, and my uncle Enoch Peterson was there, and he found out I had these firecrackers in the trunk, so I sold him a brick of firecrackers. When we got to Portland, then Al Carlson used to sell what they call lady fingers. Those were legal to sell, and stuff like that out of his store, his grocery store in Portland. But he never sold any of the big firecrackers, of which I handled. So anyway, before we left that night, I sold him a brick of firecrackers too. So that was the first time I met Al and Roma Carlson. So that was kind of an interesting deal.
Your future mother and father-in-law.
Yeah, my future mother and father-in-law. So I don't know what they thought when I left there, but anyway, it worked out fine. It's been going on for 64 years, so I guess we're okay. And what was your other question?
Your lake cabin.
Oh, and then, of course, in this whole process, because basically I never had what people call hobbies. I just did stuff, manual labor. And then in 1959, I bought a lake lot on Big Floyd Lake.
And where's that?
By Detroit Lakes, just 3 miles out of Detroit Lakes.
Detroit Lakes, Minnesota.
Minnesota.
Yep.
And my friend John Berlin, his parents had a lake cabin down there. And I had bought a boat in this whole process and taken that down there and ran it. And I thought, boy, guys should be at the lake. So I bought this lake lot for $75. And then I went...
How much?
$750.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that was a good deal.
Yeah,
$75.
that was a good deal.
Okay.
So then it was $10 a foot, 75-foot lot. And then, of course, my dad helped me because we would take a tractor down there and we cleared out the lot and all that. And then they had a deal over in Callaway, Minnesota at Miracle Lumber. They sold a basic cabin kit, they called it. All it was a tar paper roof, of course, and then log siding and a few windows. It was 20 by 24, so it wasn't very big, but I bought that. So at that point, I had about $1,200 invested, and then I went down there and I poured concrete, which didn't cost much. I'd never done that before, and learned how to, somebody told me, here's what you got to do, and we did it. I built the lake cabin, and then in the fall, the guy next to me, his name was Doug Yankee, he'd built a pretty nice cabin and put it on the market, and it sold. So one day I thought, well, somebody said you should be able to get $3,500 for your cabin. So one day I put an ad in the paper, and a guy from Arthur called me, and I told him, we'll go down and look at it. And that night he called me and he said, I'd like to buy it. So we got together. So now I had all this extra money, $3,500, and I didn't have much more than $2,000 in it. So then I didn't have any bills at that time. And then another little story on this whole thing is that I bought a Model T and I redid that and got it fixed up. And I'd paid $25 to start with, but after I was done and was driving it around, I sold it for $500. And then I went into the bowling alley where I worked, and Rex Olson was there. And Rex says, you got $100 bills? You don't need that kind of money. said, "Give me 3 of them." And at the time, his son Dick Olson was selling stock in what was going to be Northport State Bank. So he says, "Dick's over there, go and buy $300 worth of stock," which I did in 1958. I have never sold the stock. I've collected dividends and all that off of the stuff. I still have it, and today it's worth about $350,000, and so that has to stay in my inheritance because I'd have to pay too much capital gains to get rid of it. But anyway, so that's just good for the kids. Maybe the grandkids will enjoy it or something. But that's what I did as a younger person, and then of course when I got married, then we moved to Ashley, and I told Lorene we'd be there 2 years because I would get everything set up like the city association, which would take a lot of work because to be qualified for ABC, the American Bowling Congress, so that everybody's average would be recorded, that took a lot of work, but I got that done in the summer, opened up in the fall, and it worked out real well. And that winter, we had one of 7 300 bowling games that were made in the state of North Dakota. A guy by the name of Reap Dorr, or Walter Dorr was his name. He bowled a 300 game. We got that into the Fargo form and everything because they didn't have 300 games at that time, because you just had these old black balls and you didn't have them with all the ingredients they have in them today to curve and hook and everything else. So that was pretty exciting to have one of 7 300 games. I have an article on that in my history books here so that you can see it at some time if you ever want to read it. So that was an interesting deal. And then we stayed in Ashley for 2 years, and then the Ashley investors that built the building thought I was doing okay, so they bought the business, and Lorene and I moved back to Fargo.
Okay. Well, that sounds great. I appreciate you talking to us a little bit here, and we'll probably pick this up in a little bit later. Okay?
Okay, that sounds like fun to me.
All right, thanks.
Yep, goodbye.